You are listening to Missed Apex Podcast. We live F1. Welcome to Missed Apex Podcast. I'm your host, Richard Reddy, but my friends call me Spanners, so let's be friends. This week, we're resuming our news ticker service for your convenience. We understand you have a choice of many Johnny-come-lately F1 podcast offerings these days, so thank you for flying with Missed Apex Podcast. May your takes be hot and your accuracy questionable, just like my panel. If you enjoy our content, please tell your friends. We are only where we are because a lot of you go around and say to people, please listen to Missed Apex Podcast. You're our number one source of promotion and growth. Because of you, we remain an independent podcast produced in the podcasting shed with the kind permission of our better halves. We aim to bring you a race review before your Monday morning commute. We might be wrong, but we're first. I am joined in the shed by someone without whom I would fall apart. It is Matt Trumpets. How's it going, Matt?
I'm very busy upscaling the 320 by 180 videos of car shakedowns that the team seem to think is appropriate to put out on social media these days.
There is lots of things to talk about the car launches. We are going to get there. And who better to talk about car promo than PR guru expert and expert commentator Chris Stevens. How's it going, Chris?
Hey, Spanners. Yeah, it's going great. I've had a wonderful weekend of watching rugby and looking at show notes and getting all up in the things that are in this show.
Don't sully my live stream and my podcast with talk of rugby. How dare you? Let's get on with Big Dirty News. Chasing a ridiculous egg-shaped ball around the pitch, and there's 45 people on each team, and no one understands the rule. Oh, I'm triggered. Don't talk about rugby here again, Chris.
Sorry, Spanners. There are no rules in rugby. There are laws.
Oh, I see. Good. Well, the law of launch season is that you get every single F1 social media account trying to guess what's going on in the world of Formula One launches. So they're teasing out every little detail they can from what is essentially crayon drawings of what the car might look like. And I've been amused, but somewhat angered, because it's like these celebrity psychics. At the beginning of the year, they give you their predictions for the year. They say there will be a tornado in Bristol, a monarch will hit a lobster with a gavel. And then what you do is, through the year, if a king does come along and hit a lobster with a gavel, they say, see, I nailed it, I called it. They had no real insight into why a king would hit a lobster with a gavel, but they just threw out 100 predictions. They talk about the hits, they ignore the misses. So whilst the F1 Twitter, for example, is looking like this base of which source should I look at, which hot take should I take as gospel, which pundit, which person on Instagram should I see as an oracle of knowledge? The answer is none of them. No one can tell anything from these renders, Chris. And I've been going mad watching people trying to kind of pick apart this stuff and saying, oh, look at the razor edges on the floor. That indicates that a high rake full. You don't know. You can't tell anything.
This is very true. I think a lot of people tend to read too much into launch season, particularly because most of the time the renders and the pictures we're seeing aren't even of the 2023 cars. And even if it is, technically a 2023 car, by the time we get to preseason testing, it's going to look completely different anyway. So I think, if you're, Summers or someone like this, and there is a bit of value in going through everything with a fine-tooth comb, but I think for us mere mortals, just enjoy the nice pictures and getting amped up for the season.
Enjoy the pretty colors.
Yeah. So what's nice about this is that you were right, especially for the launches. There's oftentimes very little that can be told, and in fact, we saw for the Alfa Romeo launch, we saw a floor of dubious but apparent legality that did not show up at all when they rolled the car out to shake it down on an actual track. So rule number one of launch season is wait for the shakedown videos, which annoyingly all the teams seem to be putting out in potato vision these days
Yeah.
so that no one can see what's going on. But despite that, if you want some analysis, Summers F1, Scarbs, Collins, Sam Collins, these are all good people to rely on because they're not going to get fooled because they've been doing it for an awful long time.
In fairness, a lot of those shakedowns are often used as the filming days as well. So a little bit later on, we'll get the nice, cool 4K footage and all the cool angles. The drone footage. I've missed the drone footage, but the launch time is when we get all the drone footage. Not the rubbish one we saw in Spain last year, but actual good, cool drone footage of cars. And we have seen 2 cars out on track already.
Okay.
The Haas and the Red Bull. I say we've seen them. We haven't really seen them, but they've been put out. The
Matt
Haas and the
says
Red Bull.
Matt says 3.
Did we not see the Alpha on track also?
Did we? I don't
thought
recall.
that we did. There has been some analysis of the Alpha.
I mean, they only launched it yesterday. So
Yes, I know we did, in fact, because the floor was different. The floor edges had them sausagey fingers on it in the render, but then when it was on track, it had a more normal looking floor.
Oh, okay, so 3 then.
Okay, but also, like, didn't we get like leaks of McLaren coming out with that weird rear wing thing where they had like this almost like a rib of rear wings that were flat, that were like 90 degrees to the floor, and you go, oh look, maybe that's a genius invention. So really, for all this picking apart and all this, oh look at what philosophy they've gone down, it is essentially useless until you start seeing lap times.
The only thing I think is true is that Mercedes is going back to black. Because they have been posting an awful lot of black car content lately, really teasing and whetting our appetite for a return to what I think actually is a better looking livery than the classic Silver Arrow.
So, well, it must be hard for Mercedes because the silver is like iconic to their brand. It matches, you know, a lot of the cars they put out and their emblem. But also from a racing point of view, a lot of people associate very good things with that black livery. It was successful. It sent a message. It was incredibly popular. You can understand why they would want to go back to silver. But as a racing team and not a car company, it might be overwhelmingly tempting now to go back to black.
I think as well, since the huge boom in viewership to Formula One, I think more fans would recognize a black Mercedes over a silver one now. Does that make sense? I think it resonates more with fans.
Well, it does, and also it's just a better looking livery. The silver one kind of seems kind of quite unremarkable. It fades into the background. It doesn't look great on TV. Whereas the black livery is incredibly striking. But my bet is because they've been... See, here's me criticizing everyone for teasing apart tech photos, and I'm teasing apart social media. I'm teasing apart social media where they've been pushing the teal element as well. So I think it is going to be a mix of silver, black, and teal. Sorry, Matt.
As long as it's not white and red, I'm going to be very, very happy because apparently that's the livery that 90% of the grid is running. It's either blue or, you know, white and red. That's pretty much all we've seen so far. I find it interesting. Alpha, just talking about what the teams are up against. I think reliability is their biggest thing to prove this season. They lost so many points, and that's not something you're going to see in a launch video or even in a shakedown. Testing will be the real, will be a bit of a revelation there. But
sorry, Matt, which Alpha are you talking about? Just clarify.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Romeo. Alfa Romeo.
Okay.
I mean, Alpha Tauri was not unreliable last season.
So is it Alpha Bottas or is it Alpha Sonoda? That's
Alpha Joe.
Okay, Alpha Joe. Fair enough.
Alpha Joe. So I'm interested from that point of view, but what we're also beginning to see from the analysis that has been done that I trust is that it does seem like last season's Red Bull, a lot of DNA from that is beginning to show up on more and more teams. So we're beginning to see some of that convergence. And I know Summers and I were talking about it on our tech time. but it's starting to show up in real life now in cars that are actually on track.
And that's very typical of the Red Bull AlphaTauri relationship. AlphaTauri is the sister junior team to Red Bull. It was easier to make that connection when it was called Toro Rosso, because Toro Rosso was Italian for Red Bull. But then also AlphaTauri is Red Bull's fashion brand, so I guess, you know, you can also make the connection there as well. But yeah, obviously when we had
Chris, wait, what? I didn't know. I saw something about this earlier. I had no idea that Red Bull had a fashion brand. I had no idea it was called AlphaTauri, and I'm probably not the only one. How long's that been? Has that always been that?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know.
That's why they launched the car during New York Fashion Week.
Okay, I'm learning things now. So AlphaTauri, I can go and buy AlphaTauri jeans or something.
Yeah. It's a brand. Very expensive one, but it's
you learn things every day. Expect me to be on the stream next week, fully kitted out in AlphaTauri sweatpants. They have if they have sweatpants and cardigans, then they have hit my demographic perfectly.
Yeah. But yeah, just finish up that point. Obviously, last year we had a brand new generation of car, so there was not a lot that AlphaTauri could kind of cherry pick from the Red Bull, whereas they now have a year of development under their belt.
But it's not just the AlphaTauri, it's the Alfa Romeo. We're seeing more of the Red Bull aero philosophy, or chunks of it, showing up more consistently on cars throughout the grid, which suggests that on reflection, there's a lot there that other teams find of use. So one of the things to look at is to see what bits have been borrowed from the teams. And it's not always the leading teams. Some of the most interesting innovations came from midfielders, from Aston Martin, places like that, from Haas even, that wound up on the big teams. But over the course of the season, it's looking like people are beginning to put their money more on the Red Bull concept to a certain extent than on the Ferrari, or definitely the Mercedes concept.
Can I ask a question that will make me sound stupid, but I bet there's lots of people listening that would like your two's input on this? Why isn't the AlphaTauri, which used to be Toro Rosso, which is essentially the Red Bull B team, it's owned and run by the same people, why isn't it just exactly as fast as the Red Bull? But why don't they just copy it completely? Surely they can, or
copy
get close.
Copy or paper is expensive.
Chris, why isn't it the same? Like, we know Red Bull will deploy AlphaTauri and their drivers. Like in 2021, they had 4 drivers against 1 at certain times, at certain tracks. And they deployed them to go long on stints. They would completely sacrifice AlphaTauri races for the senior team. Why can't they just have a very similar aero philosophy and be just as fast?
Well, they do have a very similar aero philosophy, but it comes down to the fact that you have to design your own car. It is in the regulations. So regardless, they have to design their own chassis, even if they take parts from Red Bull. And usually it's like the entire rear end. They just take off the Red Bull effectively. But obviously, if you're Red Bull, the company, then you want to invest as much as possible into your winning team, and that's always going to be the senior team, the one that is called Red Bull, and that is their flagship marketing. So really, it ultimately comes down to resource, and also their ability to use AlphaTauri, the B team, as a training ground for engineers, for mechanics, for drivers. Whereas if you plot them straight into a race winning capability, you're missing out on that additional step of training, I think.
I think it's just to make it not look sus, Matt. That's what I reckon. I reckon everyone would get upset if the AlphaTauri was, or if they had the top 4 cars in F1. I think people would start to get annoyed. So yeah, maybe there is an element of, if this is a solid midfield team, it means it's a good training ground and it's useful in other ways. But it does kind of, it's sad that really there's only 9 competitive teams, because AlphaTauri could never take on Red Bull in a title fight, no matter how well they did.
Well, if we're going to say there's only 9 teams, then we're saying there's only 8 teams, because I'd hardly rank Williams as the least bit competitive. But I think for the purposes of our discussion, we certainly saw Mercedes show up with a car that at the end of the day they could make better but couldn't fix. And I'm pretty sure a similar thing was the case for AlphaTauri, thinking about Jody Eggington and some of the things that he said in interviews. I think they had a sort of a fundamental issue that they found that they couldn't fix. And the car itself was difficult to drive, not rewarding. Certainly harder for Gasly to drive in the condition that they were able to deploy it on track. So it may be that they are more competitive now. But the other issue that has come up, and I've seen, it was Cedric Vasseur interview, I think I read, talking about that gardening leave actually means that technology transfer in Formula One has become increasingly laggy as gardening leave gets longer and longer, and especially for the top technical people. He says, you think it'd be really fast, but if you get somebody from Red Bull, well, they have to finish their contract, and then it's another 6 months before they walk in. So they walk in halfway through a season. Their influence doesn't even show up till the season after that, when a lot of times everything they knew is not really useful in the same way.
I think you see the same thing with financial investment as well, or like McLaren's new wind tunnel, or Aston Martin's brand new factory and headquarters. They're not going to have built that thing, cut the ribbon with the scissors and then immediately come out with a race-winning car. You have to allow for the development time and the influential time to pass as well. It's almost like how if you were the first person to fly off to another planet, by the time you got there, we'd have figured out a way how to get there quicker.
That is a very impressive sci-fi and
it's not sci-fi, fact.
Yeah, but it's a thing that they do in sci-fi as well. But that's what reminded me of it. But you're right. There's no point setting off to the stars, because by the time they're halfway there, you'll create a rocket ship that will surpass it.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. I want to just talk about that now. But instead, let's talk about the Haas launch, and let's go to token American Matt Trumpets.
Well, the nice thing about Haas is they are very no nonsense with their launch. They said, here's our livery. And then they said, here's our car on a track. And we were actually able to see a lot of interesting changes. But I'd say the biggest thing to note is that they, as amongst the midfield teams we've seen thus far, they seem to be most closely aligned with the Ferrari aerodynamic philosophy.
Shocker.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it will be interesting to see what they can get out of it. Certainly, they were very, very competitive at certain races, but on the whole, their development schedule seemed to really bite them. They had a hard time keeping up as the season went on.
And this is typical of Haas, isn't it? They tend to come out the blocks running really, really strong. And you think back to all their best races, they were always in the first few rounds of the season. I think back to when Grosjean scored points on their debut in Australia. They were very competitive in Australia the following year as well. And at Bahrain last year, very, very competitive. But as you mentioned, maintaining that development is where it really tails off. And that has been a financial issue more than anything up until this point. But now with new title sponsorship in the form of MoneyGram, they're actually operating at the budget cap for the first time. So
wait, is that confirmed? So Haas is operating at the peak, so they can win.
Well, no, because there is obviously an awful lot not involved in the budget cap.
Okay.
That teams spend money on that does still influence the pace of the car. So it's not a completely level playing field just yet, but they do actually have the money to spend on the competitive nature of the car for the first time since the budget cap was introduced. So that should hopefully help to solve the issue of a lack of development across the season.
Well, that would be good, Matt, because I think that might be my favourite driver lineup. Not the driver lineup that I think is the best. What? Just from like they seem like not generally nice blokes kind of point of view. Not from I think they're the best drivers or anything, but okay, let's put it this way. You can go for a pint with one driver pairing from one of the teams. But you're obviously going to go out with Hulkenberg and Magnussen for a beer, aren't you? Surely.
Gasly and Ocon all the way.
No. Hang on. Gasly and Ocon, if I'm a single young bachelor and we're going for a wild time and end up on a boat and we need passports, then yes, Gasly and Ocon. But
Norris and Piastri,
I'm talking about like a dad beer. You know, we're going to complain about stuff. We're going to have a laugh, and we're going to exclusively drink out of tankards.
Then the middle-aged lineup.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's kind of I think we might have summed up why that might not be the greatest lineup, but yeah, I'm all in.
Be Bottas and Joe, wouldn't it?
Bottas and Joe. Yeah, that would be a close one. That would be an interesting one.
Magnussen got a pole position in Brazil, did he not? For the sprint race, at least.
Yeah, no, look, they're both very good drivers. Apart from apart from Hulkenberg's curse that he will never get a podium. They're a fantastically talented driver pairing. Magnussen has to beat Hulkenberg for his general reputation, and because I think Magnussen in an alternate universe, Magnussen gets a Brawn type car or a Vettel Red Bull blown diffuser type setup. And is a world champion. I think Kevin Magnussen.
Yeah, I would agree with that, actually.
Has world champion in him. I'm not sure you could say the same of Hulkenberg, but that's just my feeling. I'm sure he'd disagree, and he's quite big.
Well, obviously, they're both champions in their feeder series, but Magnussen's in Formula Renault 3.5 the year before he joined Formula One was really, really impressive.
Was it?
Yeah, properly, like domination. Whereas Hulkenberg took a while to get off the mark, actually, and then really like ran from there. But it was a good like 3 or 4 like rounds before he won his first race of the season. And I remember he was talking about this. I think it was on the official the Beyond the Grid podcast, where he was saying like, "Aren't you worried about the fact that you haven't won a race yet?" And he said, "No, because I know it's going to happen, and when it does, we're going to be sorted for the rest of the season." So he definitely has an underlying confidence.
Yeah, I'm not saying he's not good. We're at the very highest level here, so we're picking who's at the highestest level.
Who's at the lowest end of the high end.
Put it this way: if I'm an F1 team boss and you say to me, I think Haas have done pretty well with driver lineups, to be fair, and you say to me, you're going to have Grosjean and Magnussen. I thought that was a great driver pairing. 2 drivers with incredible potential for speed, who for whatever reason have never quite put it together. But then I think, you get Magnussen and Hulkenberg, and you go, that is a really good lineup. You know, it's good to see they've not gone down. You know, they could have picked up a Mazepin or a Sirotkin to help.
I mean, they did pick up a Mazepin. But...
Yeah, I know, but I'm saying now.
Oh, you mean now? Okay.
Yeah. and that speaks to, I guess, if they've got more budget, you don't have to go down that road.
And that was their general philosophy. And the advantage of having a title sponsor is that you do have the money to pick the drivers more so that you want. You're not forced to compromise in order to have operating budget. That said, we've seen some interesting stuff on the Haas. Most interesting to me, looking at least, is their shark fin, which is like stepped and has a cutout underneath. So keep an eye out for that at testing if you like those sorts of things. It's very distinctive, and I'll be curious to see if anyone else runs any version of it whatsoever.
Can I very quickly pick up on what you mentioned at the start of this segment, which was how they just kind of threw the car out there and just went, blah, there it is. Enjoy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Which was then followed by the Red Bull, who spent 10 years waiting to show off a car that was basically identical to the one that came before it. But what I love since then as well, like the AlphaTauri launch, they just threw the car out and people went, oh no, we've waited all this time for nothing. I love the fact that we've had such mixed reactions. But obviously, when you compare, Red Bull is such a huge global brand and does so much more than what it does in Formula One, and also had quite a big announcement to make in the form of Red Bull Ford powertrains as well to come before it. Then I think it does make sense that they have a bit of a season company launch PR event before showing off the car.
Oh, I suppose we should talk about the Red Bull launch. I suppose that's a natural place to go. We didn't cover that last week, did we? Because we were doing driver masterclass and then tech stuff. So we can go into the Red Bull launch, which was definitely weird. EJ has said some money's just slipped into the Missed Apex tip jar after after Spanners mentioned Magnussen having World Driver Championship potential. That's the only reason I did that segment, was to get a tip jar donation from a single Danish patron. But you can, if you think we're doing good things here on Missed Apex Podcast, if you contribute to our tip jar, we will spend all of that on our advertising strategy at the beginning of the season. Last year, we pushed for it, and you guys gave us an embarrassing amount of cash. Every single penny of that tip jar was spent on an advertising campaign around the start of the season. I've got some secret sauce which worked to squeeze every value out of every penny, and I would love to do that again. I'm not expecting a repeat of that miracle, but if you would like to contribute to our ad campaign, if you believe in what we're doing, go to missedapexpodcast.com/tip jar, and not a single penny of that will get filtered through my liver, I swear.
And I'd be foolish not to mention as well the opportunities on Patreon as well, which, for £2 a month is where it starts, and you can join our growing amazing community on Slack, the live chat room as well, ad-free feed, first dibs on things like our events, karting events and iRacing series as well, and more things like that. There are loads of little perks, so patreon.com/missedapex as well.
That's true. And if nothing else, just if you want to chip in $1.99 a month, then you get an ad-free private feed. So remove the ads for 33p or 33 cents a show. Red Bull launch, Matt, and F1 Twitter, the Hamfosi, was enraged that Stefano Domenicali, head of F1, was personally endorsing the Red Bull launch. How dare he support one particular team? Obviously, that's hyperbole. That's hyperbole. But Stefano Domenicali at the Red Bull launch, or was it the Ford launch, or was it the Honda launch? It was all very confusing.
Well, it was the Red Bull launch with the Red Bull Ford Powertrain announcement with Stefano Domenicali in attendance. No doubt, because of the Ford involvement being technically a mostly newish, according to FIA diktat, powertrain manufacturer, but not entirely new. They're not getting all the bells and whistles.
Oh, we need to pause on that. We need to pause on that. Right. So Red Bull Powertrain is being treated in 2026 as a new entrant, and therefore would be entitled to spend more money on development. Is that correct?
They are not entirely new. They didn't get the full kit. They only got 90% of it.
90% is basically all of it. So
right, can I just say,
right?
As well,
okay, we're going to argue. We're all going to argue.
No. I agree with you, Spanners. Okay. I am furious about this.
Yeah.
What is the current name for that power unit that they have used for the last year? Red Bull Powertrains.
Red Bull Powertrains.
Okay, it is not a new entry then.
Okay, good.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that they've stuck a Ford badge on it now. It's exactly the same. Treating because they've swapped out Honda for Ford, regardless of whether they were in the name or not, you may as well give new entry benefits to every team that changes power unit supply, because it's exactly the same thing.
Okay, so this is going to take some unpacking. So it was Red Bull Honda, and it was the Honda engine. Honda did wonders developing that power unit. Probably the best power unit on the grid. It was fast. It's reliable, and it's amazing. I don't know why Honda decided to step back away from F1, if they have, but we'll talk about McLaren later. But Red Bull said, right, no longer is this a Honda power unit. This is now a Red Bull powertrain, and they built their own facility in Milton Keynes. They have done this before with the Renault engine, where they said, Christian Horner flat out at a press conference said, we don't have a Renault engine, we have a Tag Heuer engine. And as far as I know, that watch manufacturer does not build motorsport hybrid engines. But that Red Bull powertrain that they've been talking about is the Honda engine. Have I missed any subtlety about it? That is basically the Red Bull, the Honda powertrain.
You will love this. What ultimately caught Red Bull out, because they built a whole facility in whatever part of their campus they built it in. They kitted it up. They were ready to build engines. And then they started looking at it and realized that it was much easier to let Honda just keep on building the engines. But what they did start doing was the battery packs. They started assembling the battery packs in Milton Keynes for the Honda engines. And that, my friend, that is the sole reason they're not 100% brand new entrant in 2026.
And the power part of it, the electric systems, that is the part that Ford are meant to be taking over as well. So when they say, oh, Ford is coming in as an engine supplier, it's not a Ford internal combustion engine. Ford are contributing to the hybrid systems, which is coincidentally the bit that Red Bull powertrains have been doing separate from Honda, which it feels like they're just rebadging that as Ford, but essentially using the Honda IP. Now, I've had people on Twitter, Matt, saying to me, there is no way Honda would allow that IP, that intellectual property, to be copied. Therefore, Red Bull are essentially building a powertrain, a power unit from scratch. And I can't see that is the case. They have had the benefit of all that Honda development, and it is an evolution of that going into 2026. How on earth are they getting treated as 90% a new entrant?
Because Red Bull themselves are not building this power unit. Honda is. Honda is still assembling it. It's still basically Honda, except for the battery packs. In 2026, it's going to be Red Bull assembling the power units in their own facility. Therefore, they're getting a lot of the advantage of being new, even though, as you rightly point out, certainly a lot of the IP and knowledge will be lodged in Red Bull's head.
So I think the thing to remember here as well is that we're currently in the middle of an engine freeze and will be until the end of 2025. So even though, Red Bull PT, they've putting together the Honda engines, no one's doing any real development on these engines anymore. So in terms of that, Red Bull PT, they're not doing anything new. They're just sort of putting together what gets shipped to them from Japan.
And I will go on to say that, like, certain aspects of the engine, I think the plating for the combustion chambers, the shafts for the MGUH, which spin at a ridiculous speed, are very secretive. I don't think Red Bull is going to have that information because they come from other Honda divisions. But a lot of this is very standard internal combustion stuff. I think really the only fiddly bit is the turbulent jet ignition, which is now on all the powertrains currently in Formula One. So again, it's not the kind of secret it was when these power unit regulations first started out and people were experimenting with this. The challenge for Red Bull is they're going to need a lot of research and development that Ford has done over the years to optimize their powertrain, both with the electrics and I think to a certain extent with the combustion. But Ford, too, is taking information out of this for themselves. But I'd say for Red Bull, the bigger win for them is the commercial partnership with an American company.
Yeah. And I think this is an important point to note, because I did see Hamilton fans getting upset that Stefano Domenicali seemed to be endorsing the Red Bull launch. I think it seems pretty clear now that Domenicali was there really to welcome Ford back into the F1 fold, into the F1 family. And I think there was a bit of a misunderstanding of what this would be. And I think it was a bit more of a Red Bull launch than a welcoming Ford in than perhaps he realized. So when they called him up to the stage, he was like, nope. And he just didn't turn up. And that created quite an awkward moment in their launch, which was never acknowledged. They just, like a cat falling off a fence, they pretended that was the plan all along.
I meant to do that.
Yeah, which is the correct way to deal with that misunderstanding.
So, of course, this leaves Honda in the lurch a little bit as a manufacturer that is still registered for the 2026 power unit regulations.
Nice
that doesn't
segue.
Necessarily mean that they will enter an engine in 2026. But if they were to do so, I can't think of a single team that might possibly benefit from becoming a manufacturer entry, for example.
Who could it be? Who could we possibly be talking about? I don't know. But before we go there, I do want to point out the thing that I love most about this is that sure enough, it was all down to who runs the business of Red Bull. Ford wants no ownership, and that's why they won the prize.
Well, as Chris very successfully segued into there, the rumours have been swirling that McLaren are looking at a partnership with Honda. And there are reliable reports from none other than Mr. Joe Sayward, who comes and gives his experience and wisdom on this podcast as one of the longest-serving F1 journalists in existence and history, has been stating that there have been conversations. But as Joe states, these conversations happen all the time. From a fan point of view, you might be forgiven for looking at that with skepticism, as the last time McLaren decided to partner with Honda, they had ditched Mercedes, saying you cannot win an F1 championship if you are a customer team, if you're taking an engine from another manufacturer. Therefore, they went with Honda and dived down into F1 wilderness for 4 years, despite having an exceptionally talented driver lineup of Jenson Button and Fernando Alonso. They were consigned to being absolutely swamped on straights, and leading to the infamous radio calls of Fernando Alonso calling it a GP2 engine, wrecking the relationship between Mercedes and Honda, certainly their PR department, and really making that quite a toxic relationship. Before Toro Rosso, I think at the time, took on Honda, were they still Toro Rosso at the time, basically trying to test out whether that Honda engine would work for Red Bull, and then Red Bull took that on, and then the rest is history. Surely, Chris, surely, if we were best mates with McLaren right now, down the pub, we're 5 pints in, and they're going, do you know what? I just miss Honda. And like everything was fine, and I know there was problems, but I'm gonna call them. And you're like, no, leave it, McLaren. It's no good. It didn't work for a reason. You're both good people, but it's not gonna happen.
Yeah, that's God, that's a conversation I've had.
Sorry, I
in
know.
real life. This is more the ending of Four Weddings and a Funeral.
Okay.
Where they kiss passionately in the rain and everything ends out great.
I'm just a consumer team, a customer team looking at an engine manufacturer.
That's Notting Hill, mate.
Oh, is it Notting Hill? Oh, and I got the quote wrong. Anyway, go on.
Yeah. So, in all seriousness, right? The McLaren that Honda knew before is gone, long gone.
Yeah.
Okay. What Ron Dennis said at that time about you can't win a world championship as a customer team, it was true, and it's still true. So how do they go about, for example, winning a world championship again, and also retaining the services of their star driver, Lando Norris? Become a manufacturer. I mean, it just makes sense, doesn't it? Everything about it makes sense.
They've changed, Matt. They've changed. It's going to be fine.
Well, I think this is the thing. If you look at the cast of characters when Honda showed up, so first of all, it should have been imminently predictable. The path. All you had to do was look at Renault, who basically did nothing before, 2013 and a half to get ready for the 2014 power unit regulations. And look at their path. You had to have known that it was going to be more than a few rocky years before your power unit manufacturer caught up with, especially because they didn't get an exemption so much, that I recall, from the token system, as much as they should have had. They should have just basically been given freedom to catch up before they were put under the same regulations. And maybe Formula One learned something from that. Maybe they didn't. But having said that, the cast of characters, Whitmarsh, Dennis, Eric Boulier, Alonso, all long gone from McLaren. Honda, having caught up and demonstrated a certain acuity, is going to want to find the highest team up the grid they can partner with, and the team that has the most outside resources. And we've got Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari. They don't need a Honda engine.
Yeah, Alpine can't.
Alpine,
yeah.
well, they could maybe use a Honda engine, but they're stuck with Viri. And I think they're going to have Alpine engines in 26. Actually, they're going to rebadge them at that point.
Oh,
Yeah,
well, then it's definitely not Renault's fault then, Matt, if they do that. If the team's been renamed and the power unit's been renamed, Renault are absolved of all guilt. Unbeatable never existed. Let it be wiped from history.
He's a Hyundai. I don't know what you're talking about.
He's a Hyundai.
Yeah. So McLaren is the best choice for Honda. And if McLaren want to become a works team again, Honda is, looking like a pretty good choice at this point. Maybe 5 beers in and 2 o'clock in the morning, but still.
That's what it is. 5 beers in at 2 in the morning.
If you're only 5 beers in at 2 a.m., then you've been doing something wrong, my friend.
Yeah, you need to up.
Okay, youngster.
You need to up your pre-drinks. Yeah.
But can I just clarify? The reason I point out that McLaren has changed, because I think a lot of people would look at that time and say, well, Honda didn't deliver the goods. Like, well, do you think it's a coincidence that as soon as they left McLaren, they started to be able to deliver performance, reliability, fuel efficiency, all the things a good power unit needs to do? And the reason
was it the size zero concept of McLaren that they were so married to? Yeah.
Yes, there were a lot of extreme demands from McLaren, which they made zero compromise for, and also felt like they could just sweep every single issue that they had under the carpet of Honda is rubbish. And as soon as they entered into a proper partnership with the Red Bull teams, suddenly things started to come together, didn't it? So I don't see Honda as the main issue in that tumultuous relationship. And that's why I say it's important that McLaren has changed rather than Honda.
Which is not to say that it's 100% on McLaren. The fact that partnership didn't work, because there were clearly reports that Honda was having trouble readjusting to a Formula One environment versus road car manufacturer environment, which is outside of IndyCar, which is a separate facility in the US. That's really where it was coming from. Sort of the corporate culture did have some readjusting to do. I mean, I think there's some blame on both sides, and that's fair. But the majority of it, I really do think, came from McLaren. And if we look at what happened when Zach Brown came in and they changed management and they changed engineering structure, sort of that blame game that started being played almost from the beginning when they showed up on track, I think represented a lot of the troubles that McLaren was having at the time, because it was a culture thing. Everyone was blaming each other for it rather than working together to solve problems. And this is always where I love to hold up Mercedes as a great counter example. And you see more and more teams, I think, trying to implement that kind of a structure because it is very clearly effective.
No, I don't know. I like the thing we use for the whose fault is it, that's based on my marriage, where when anything goes wrong, immediately try to distance yourself from blame or establish blame for the other person. It must always be mostly someone's fault.
Isn't that the point of having kids, though?
What, did you blame the kids? I'd not even thought of that. You're a genius.
Yeah.
Chris.
Yeah, right. Well,
Chris.
Spanish, you're a rookie. If you haven't thought of that at this point. Even I have thought of that.
All right. Speaking of weird relationships, golf has had a funny relationship with Formula One. You might remember a flurry of excitement from Formula One journalists around the Monaco Grand Prix. 2 Monaco Grand Prix ago? It wasn't. Was it last season?
2021.
Was it 2021?
Golf as in oil, not golf as in silly trousers and.
No, sorry. That
bats.
is because I'm back in Essex, so I'm struggling between my vowels. So ball and bull, like the ball with horns and the bouncy ball, going to sound the same from now on because I'm here.
Golf.
So golf and golf is going to sound the same. So no, Gulf Oil have had a funny relationship with Formula One. Yeah, that big launch, all the journalists got excited. They'd clearly been invited for vol-au-vents and cocktails and champagne, and all it really was in the end was a livery change, so a one-off sponsorship for Monaco.
Right. So this is about the the Williams launch that happened last week, where we were told
yes, there was more build up.
We weren't told though, were we? Because I think just
There was
someone made
rumours.
it up.
I think, and
someone made up this idea
Chris,
that the Golf livery was going to come back and there was going to be a Porsche deal involved in it as well, and it was clearly absolute tiddle-waddle.
Yes,
and it should never have been trusted. And but what I will say is, all right, I know everyone's disappointed that we don't have a Golf livery, a Golf title sponsorship.
Okay.
Because it's gorgeous,
orange
Spanish,
and blue.
It really is. It's a great looking car.
Okay.
But from what I understand about it, it is the start of a growing partnership.
Oh, okay.
Between the two,
well, that's positive.
Where it will increase, and it should primarily be involved and led by fan engagement. Now, quite what this is going to involve in details. I don't know yet, but it seems like it's going to be a great thing for the fans to enjoy and get them more involved in the sport, and it's going to increase over time as well. So I'm looking at this as a very positive thing, not to mention as well that it's providing some much needed finance for a team that just lost Nicholas Latifi and his sponsors.
But aren't Duralton, the finance group in charge of Williams now, are they not fairly liquid, or are they like a Genie Lotus type situation?
I mean, no, they're not. Genie would be the wrong end of the scale.
Oh, okay.
But they're not fronting the full budget cap and the full budget for the for the team. They still need these sponsors.
Yeah. So for reference, do any of us know how close? We just said Haas is close to having the budget cap to spend. Is Williams Duralton close to that, Matt?
The only thing that I have read is that over the last 2 years, I believe they've been fully funded to the cost cap. Yes.
Really?
But they had Safino because of Nicholas Latifi as well. That's a
good point.
It's quite a loss they've just had. So they've had to recuperate that. But they are actually getting more interest from the US now because of
Logan Sargent. Oh, okay.
Is he of drinking age? Yeah, in America. We've been making all these allergies. Can he even partake?
What is his actual age? And I don't know.
Is he 20? I'm going to look it up real quick.
21 is the age of legally entering an establishment and drinking.
Yeah.
It hasn't always been, but that's more or less what it is now. Yeah.
But what a lot of my age British people are looking at is this a way that Williams can go up the grid? Because certainly with Albon, you've got someone who can deliver consistent results. Sargent's a little bit of an unknown, but the main thing is, do they have the budget to develop? Do they have the budget to start going up the grid? Because Williams at the back of the grid is terrible for F1.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect fireworks so much at the moment. Development, I think, is probably going to be where they hit the hardest. So they might come out the blocks running, and we'll see where they go from there. Sargent, by the way, is of legal age. He is 22. Was born in the year 2000.
No,
I don't want to hear that.
Yeah, I don't like that kind of thing at all.
Williams is an interesting case because the problems there, I think, have been demonstrably, if you look at who's been there, more than just financial. I think there is fundamentally some kind of a culture problem at Williams, and they've not been able to build, despite having some talented people, anything that begins to resemble a successful car. And with the advent of James Vowles, I'm very curious to see if he can fix that problem. So far, nobody's been able to. But if he can fix it, then I think Williams is very well placed with their deal with Mercedes to move up to, I don't even know if they'll move up the grid, but certainly to score more than 5 points they scored last season, to be more competitive with the back of the midfield at the very least.
But Vowles only has come in, he can only come in at the end of February. I don't know if he's even officially started yet, because I believe he had some other commitment that he needed to do. But all his talk, all the interviews is about culture, as you say, Matt, and changing the culture. So what I would love to hear as a long-standing Williams fan since the real Red 5, sorry Vettel fans, the real Red 5, Mansell, and all through like supporting Damon Hill, and I was a big Coulthard fan as well. What I want to see is by Barcelona hearing reports that everyone at Williams is super happy and that they live and work in a nice place, and there's all harmony, and there's none of the Capito drama leaks that have been coming out.
Yeah, so what we were saying earlier about how these things take time.
No,
this is gonna take time.
Okay, it's gonna take time. All right. Where does that put us next on the topic list, Matt? I think that just about covers launches.
Your favorite driver.
My favorite driver
said a thing.
Kobayashi said a thing.
Yeah, really?
No, not
I
Kobayashi.
was a big Kobayashi fan.
You know who I'm talking about.
Sergio Perez said a thing. Oh, yeah.
No.
Lewis Hamilton said a thing.
No.
Who's my favorite driver? You're confusing and angering me.
I am 100% better. Alonso.
Oh, yes. Oh, this new story. How could I forget? Oh, my goodness. Fernando Alonso has come out and declared, and look, I know that sometimes journalists ask leading questions, but Fernando Alonso has been commonly widely reported as saying that Lance Stroll is fast enough to become world champion, which goes to show that when you enter Westeros, you must bend the knee.
I love this. I think they just left out the bit where he said, assuming everyone else on the grid is a billionaire's son in about 5 years' time.
So, no, not even in. It's not even in defense of.
Yeah, go ahead, defend
Alonso.
it. Go on, Chris. Go on. We're waiting. We're waiting. Just right here. Yeah,
it's in defense of whoever asked him the question, because
Yes.
I'm fairly certain they didn't just ask him, "Do you think Lance Stroll can become world champion?"
Yeah.
Because otherwise he has no reason to include that in the answer.
Yeah. So it wasn't Fernando Alonso was walking to Tesco's and someone was alongside him secretly taping him, and Alonso just went, do you know what? I've really just been off the top of my head thinking about how Lance Stroll is probably going to be F1 champion. So it has been widely reported, but what do you expect Fernando Alonso to say when asked about his new teammate? He hasn't come out and said, yes, Lance Stroll is a genuine, he's the best young talent in F1, which is what Otmar Schaffnauer said when he was under the employ of Lawrence Stroll. He said he's got speed, which I don't think is entirely unfair. Did Lance Stroll have speed to enter F1? When he entered F1, we could debate that, but given the unprecedented opportunity he's had to build and develop and have people like Anthony Davidson preparing him for his first drive in F1, spending 20 million, having a old or a few years out of date F1 car to practice on, and having a team bought for him, and just having this constant waterfall of opportunity. Yeah, he's pretty quick. Like he is probably the best pay driver, the best out and out pay driver in existence. He's fine. And I think that you could justify employing Lance Stroll as a number 2 driver. Let's say you had you had Piastri and you wanted someone with recent F1 experience to be there to be like a benchmark. I think Lance Stroll is a decent, what would you call it? A decent calendar candle, like a Type B supernova that you can compare his performance in that car to this car and know where you're at. But to say he has the speed to be a world champion is obviously going to create headlines.
Well, I love this. I mean, he could have said he's fast. He's had really good results in the wet. It's challenging, and it's going to be exciting to be along someone who has that kind of talent. Because after all, this is what you'd expect. But he very clearly went on to say, has the possibility to be world champion. And I don't know, we were talking about Magnussen earlier. I don't know about you,
It's not.
but if you asked me to pick which one of those 2 drivers I'd bet on in a race,
yeah,
I'm pretty sure I'd choose Magnussen.
no, but if you remember, like on this podcast, like a few years back, I was warning of the possibility that Lawrence Stroll, and this was pre-cost cap, would have had the ability pre-cost cap to, if it was his will, direct $1 billion at a Formula One team, have a second driver that is instructed to not win the world championship, and Lance Stroll could pick up a world title. Like, he is good enough to do that. And there are drivers who have picked up world championships by being in incredibly dominant cars and being the number one driver. So there is that potential. But even a 57-year-old Fernando Alonso in 2023 has got to wipe the floor with Lance Stroll and make that, because in my opinion, he is going to do better against Lance Stroll than Sebastian Vettel did. I think Fernando Alonso is a better driver than Sebastian Vettel. Feedback at missedapex.net so Matt can deal with the fallout of that comment. But Alonso, even at his age now, I think, like, all things being even, is going to show his talent against Lance Stroll, unless there's something strange going on. So those comments are going to be very quickly shown to be, well, that's not quite true, because he doesn't have the speed of an aging Fernando Alonso. So you have to think, what is the game? What game is Fernando Alonso playing? Is he being paid just so much money that he will actually be a supporting driver? It can't be that. He's got to be just playing nice until he finally pounces. Surely. Sorry, Matt, then Chris.
Well, I was going to say, at the risk of stealing what Chris was about to say.
No, steal it. I'm fed up with that guy.
Thank you. I have permission. Yeah. I will now go to town. No, Alonso has actually known Stroll for quite some time, because he knew him through the Ferrari Academy, of which Stroll was a member and Alonso assisted with when Alonso was at Ferrari. So some of this might be, I don't know, I'd say more genuine than we want to give it credit for. But I think a lot of it is very much Alonso, as he first did at Alpine, positioning himself to get in the good graces of the people who have the actual power. And I know once Chris makes his point, I actually went back and looked up what Alonso said about Ocon when he first went to Renault. We'll get to that. But first, Chris.
Well, hang on. EJ's comment in the live chat is this just Alonso setting up for the possibility to go, well, I beat a possible world champion at the end of the season? But more realistically, is if he absolutely trounces Stroll, you want that to look like a miracle. You don't want it to look like you're fighting bums.
This is the thing. The better he makes his teammate look, the better he looks when he beats them, like he did with Ocon.
That's why Rosberg bigs up Hamilton all the time. He's like, Hamilton is basically an unbeatable.
Nice try, Chris. I'm pretty sure Ocon won the last round of that.
I don't think he did. But what I will say,
he did.
No, I don't think he did. But what I will
points,
say,
absolutely.
Oh yeah, because points mean everything, don't they?
Yep.
Yeah, Nico Rosberg got more points in the 2016 World Championship than Lewis Hamilton.
And that's why he was world champion.
Talk to me about
Funny
that,
how that works.
Anyway. What I will say is that I don't think he's being paid so much money to just sort of fluff Lance Stroll. Because as far as I remember, he's taken a pay cut since leaving Alpine. He's on less money at Aston. So.
Yeah. I think he is coming in there to beat Lance Stroll, and he's worried that it's going to look too easy. So he's trying to go, no, this is a challenge, and I'm so happy to support him, as the quote goes. But Matt, you had to go on then. What did Alonso say about Ocon at the start of Alpine?
Right. So he said, definitely I'm impressed, and I'm happy to have Esteban alongside me. He's very professional. He works very hard, not only here trackside, but also in the simulator. We shared a lot of stuff. While either of us is in the simulator, we try to be connected and work towards a better car. And then when he left, he said, my teammate is trying to kill me.
Okay. So
I'm looking forward to seeing what he says when he leaves Aston.
Oh, and the thing is, you're not saying I look forward to what he says when he leaves Aston after a 5-year harmonious relationship. Like, everyone is betting on this ending in some kind of drama. Like, what is he thinking? Because he's going to go in there. If they have a championship winning car and Alonso wins the championship, and it's an outside bet, of Aston Martin turning up with a championship winning car. But by the way, there was a report, I think it was Planet F1, I think Christian Horner being quoted as saying, we're hearing big numbers from the Aston Martin tests, so perhaps they could be a dark horse. If Aston Martin did a brawn and turned up with a championship winning car and Alonso wins the championship, that makes a mockery of Project Stroll. Like, that just defeats the whole mission, like this 10-year mission to explore strange new racetracks and to do things that could never be done is all wasted if they get the championship winning car and Stroll isn't the world champion. So I think Alonso is betting on the fact that his reputation is on the line. He beat Alonso, he beat Ocon, moves on to Aston Martin, beats Stroll, and then hopes that then, I think he's still gunning for a Ferrari contract or a McLaren contract or something that's going to elevate him up the grid. This is not the be-all and end-all for Alonso. He has no plans to retire.
Except he didn't beat Ocon last season, but okay.
Well, do you know what? Actually, lots of people think he was still the better driver despite the points difference.
That is a fair position to have. I wouldn't argue with you.
I agree.
And Ocon would argue that perhaps he looked after his car a little more, and perhaps Alonso was on the fiery edge, and that's why he did. And here's one example that people won't like: Spa 2022. Everyone blamed Lewis Hamilton for cutting in on Alonso, and I think that's correct. Lewis Hamilton, if to apportion blame, that was Hamilton cutting in on Alonso. But Alonso, he really was on the edge. He really kept his foot in. The smart play in that situation all day long was for Alonso to lift off, let Hamilton get in front, and then slot in behind and get a good result. Alonso was. And this, I don't think this has been talked about at all. Alonso blew that whole race, that fantastic position he was in, by insisting on keeping his foot in up the inside of Lecombe. And that's the kind of thing that perhaps Ocon didn't do. Because if you look at Ocon in the Force India in like 2018, 2019, that epic charge, 5 cars going down into Lecombe in lap 1 in Spa-Francorchamps, where he had the chance to get up the inside and punt Vettel's Ferrari off into existence. Ocon slotted back in behind, and we were all disappointed. We're like, why didn't you take that on? And discretion was the better part of valor, and he got a better result.
I think those are two quite different scenarios.
No, they're exactly the same from
memory. The Alpine was incredibly fast at Spa, probably faster than the Mercedes. So
yeah, I'm just saying he kept his foot in an odd way. Where I don't think he'd have kept his foot in against Verstappen, against a lot of other drivers. I think he saw Hamilton, and I think he saw, I'm gonna fight this to the death.
Is this a version of Verstappen and Hamilton drive against each other differently than they do against the other drivers on the grid?
I think a lot of drivers
it's a little personal.
I think a lot of drivers drive against different drivers because it's it's different. Like anyone against Magnussen goes, I'm gonna take that front wing. Why does Magnussen have front wing end plates? I want to take it from him. Yeah.
My trophy.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone wants Magnussen's front.
Wants an in-plate trophy from Magnussen.
Exactly, yeah. If I ever meet Kevin Magnussen, that would be my first question. Please, can I have a front wing end plate? Next topic probably the last topic. Can we stop talking about what the FIA president says? Please.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. Why is that?
All right, that's it.
Because brilliant. No. Sorry. Go on, Chris.
No, I'm so relieved that we're talking about this. Because the reason we won't hear from it anymore is because he's no longer involved in the day-to-day running of the Formula One World Championship. Now, this was part of his manifesto, that he was not going to eventually be involved in the day-to-day running of Formula One. But the timing of this, following a series of controversies surrounding Mohammed bin Sulayem, I don't believe in coincidence when it comes to these things. So make of that what you will.
So my sort of obvious take, my Occam's razor, what's the most obvious thing, is that he said a bunch of stuff that upset the teams, that upset the drivers, that upset F1, that upset Liberty, and then everyone kind of went, no, enough is enough. You have to either go or I think at the very least, Matt, they said, you're making our positions untenable. You are, in political terms, you have become a distraction.
Well, so yeah, I think to a certain extent, I suspect his own people probably put it to him that he was doing more harm than good, let's say. But having said that, it's also, I don't know, looks kind of clear to me as an alleged sort of thing that there was a very concerted effort to make him look as bad as possible, because some of the things he said, Liberty and the teams didn't like. And I find that to be a very dangerous territory for the sport overall, given the nature of the decrees which they just finally got out of with the EU anti-competition people.
So in the UK, we had a political comedy drama called The Thick of It. And yes, Prime Minister. And I guess you guys had like House of Cards, you know, this inward looking at like, how do you spin things in politics? And it was a little like troubling to suddenly when it seems like Mohammed bin Sulayem is upsetting everybody, particularly the FIA. And the catalyst seems to be when he started talking about the valuation of Formula One. That seemed to be the big thing. Like, don't mess with the money. We can talk about ethics. We can talk about philosophies. We can talk about new entrants. But when you start talking about money and stock prices, you need to start looking over your shoulder. And then things started surfacing about comments that he'd made, you know, a decade ago when he was still a fully formed human adult, which were pretty
2 decades ago, but
it's still
and removed from the internet.
But abhorrent comments, like indefensible comments that is not an accidental off the come thing. He deliberately made, you know, these very misogynistic comments. But why?
Which Bernie never did. Thank God.
Bernie never did. But why did they come?
Sorry, that's an old joke. Look it up.
But why did they come to the surface at that specific point? And then, as Chris says, you know, you can be skeptical of coincidences. And I think in all those political dramas we talked about, that is called a briefing. So there was a briefing against Mohammed bin Sulayem in the press. And that is that kind of sinister thing that you were talking about, Matt, there, where there was definitely, there was a will to get him to move on from the role. These stories started surfacing. They're true. He said those things, but the timing was very targeted and direct.
Yeah, it's suspect. And let's be clear, I'm only wish to discuss his actions right now, because I think they are most germane to our discussion.
Yes,
as in charge of the FIA, I think we all find what he said earlier to be reprehensible and not acceptable. But he's had 2 decades to go to therapy and sort it out.
Well, we don't know if he has, but okay.
We don't know if he has, but he's not, as president of the FIA, been anything but supportive of, let's say, women in motorsport, for example.
Sure.
So, you know, we can just sort of say.
So for me, it was the timing of look what we found. So there was definitely a briefing against him. So that says to me, there was a will for him to move on. We're being told like, no, he's keeping his job. His statement basically amounted to, I will say less things out loud.
Yeah, pretty much. But I think the thing that really did him in, I think the thing that's most problematic is the new teams.
Oh, okay.
He's very clear that Liberty and the teams very clearly don't want new teams. And he's opened up a process and said, I want 2 new teams, because that's what the Concord Agreement currently allows for. 2 new teams.
It's only 2.
Only 2. Up to 12, 24 cars on the grid. But that agreement is running out. So he, as president, if he thinks that's best for the sport to have more teams in the sport, raise your hand if you'd like to see some extra cars on the grid. That's all of us raising our hands. Okay, well, then you agree with the FIA on this one, and F1 is absolutely trying to torpedo that along with the teams.
Why?
And this is the dynamic tension, because FIA regulate the sport for the good of the sport. It's F1's job, in the form of Liberty, Formula FOM, to sell, to put a package on that and sell it to the rest of the world.
Yes.
Now, obviously, there's a lot of overlap here, but occasionally there's tension. It's clearly in Formula One's interest, the business side, to not have to deal with new teams. They have a thing, they can sell it.
Hello, New York.
Yes, I know. I love my traffic people.
Good.
They have a thing, they can sell it, they can package it nicely. Everybody knows the main players. They have to do very little work and they can take more money from it. If 2 new teams show in, yeah, the teams get more money up front, but longer term, that's a pie being divided into more slices, and the teams don't like that. And potentially that causes a problem with all of the teams having adequate funding. Do we all remember when all the teams came in last time with the promise of a cost cap? How many of them tanked and failed and looked miserable on TV?
Exactly 3.
And nobody wants to see failures like that on TV anymore, which is why Formula One is very, very, and I think rightfully so, very, very concerned about who they let in the doors. But from a sporting point of view, getting some fresh blood in and giving some young drivers more chances to be on the grid and just simply having more cars there is, I think, the right answer. So there's always should be this dynamic tension because we have a regulatory body on one side and a commercial body on the other side. And occasionally they're not going to agree on stuff.
A bit of an aside, because I do want to roll back to maybe explaining a little bit the relationship between the FIA and FOM. But when you said who wants more teams on the grid, we all put our hands up. Most of the people in our Patreon Slack group also put their hands up, but a few sort of thumbs down. So I just want to say, if you only want 20 cars on the grid, you must also object to natural track limits like grass, walls, and gravel. And if you hate open runoff, that's fine, but we should also have more teams on the grid, because in the olden days, and I'm sadly old enough to remember the times of like 6 cars finishing, it was because these natural obstructions, these natural traps like gravel, used to just beach people. People would have a small off and they'd be beached in the gravel. And then this is why I want more cars on the grid, because I still have PTSD of watching as a young person, as a young F1 fan, and getting an hour into the race going, oh, there's only 10 cars here. And some of the spin-offs, like there'd be a slight contact, they'd spin off, they'd be beached in the gravel, and that would be it. And that is why I want a 75 car grid. That is why for the Missed Apex F3 Championships, which will be broadcast live on an iRacing broadcast stream on YouTube on the 25th of February from the Circuit of Americas, that is why I have a 60 car grid, because no matter how much carnage there is, we always settle down into a good race up front. But Matt, can you give us a little bit of just a very short primer? Why, if Liberty Media, FOM, what does FOM stand for?
Formula One Management.
Okay, Formula One Management is
essentially
Liberty
a holding company for the commercial rights.
But that's F1. So F1 is Liberty Media. They are headed up by Stefano Domenicali and Liberty Media Group, and they decide the broadcast rights. They sell it to whoever, like Sky TV or manage F1 TV Live. So they've got the commercial rights to it. Why aren't they also in charge of the FIA, who do the rules and who are a non-profit organization looking after the future of F1? Why aren't they together? Why isn't that one group?
Well, let's start with this general thing. It is normal for sports leagues to behave as monopolies. And it is normal for monopolies to be highly regulated or illegal under most of our current economic systems. Having said that, what happened was all the way back in the 90s, kids, and you might want to settle down because this is a long story.
Uncle Trumpets is sitting by the tree. Everyone gather round.
For a long and boring story. That's right. This is the one you want to put on when you're lying in bed with your earbuds, but you can't quite fall asleep. Anyway, it came to the attention of the European Union that Formula One as a sport was engaging in, well, certain activities that limited the commercial reach of certain other parties. And they decided that this was bad. This was not allowed. They were going beyond making rules for the sport to make the sport good, and they were making rules for the sport to absolutely kneecap all potential competitors. And this is against the backdrop of what is called the FISA-FOCA wars, where there was potentially Formula One was going to split itself and see some people shoot off and try and start their own series. Happened over here in the US with IndyCar and kart, but they managed to patch things up. The long and short of it was a decree from the EU about what could and could not be gotten away with. And the way they solved the problem, much like Suleyman, was they split the Formula One baby into the regulatory body that regulates the rules for the sport and the commercial body, which was then in charge of packaging and selling the sport as a commercial product. Therefore, I can sell the sport, but my selling the sport can't kneecap any competitors, because the FIA is only interested in the overall well-being of the sport as a sport, rather than making money from it. And to make it all work, the FIA cleverly sold the rights, TV rights, for 100 years for what amounted to sort of a paltry sum to the commercial rights holder.
And unfortunately, F1 hasn't become massively more popular overnight.
Yeah, fortunately, they're not losing money on that. Why they didn't go for royalties on what was collected, to this day, I think Bernie said, "Oh, just trust me. This is really a good deal for you because you get the cash up front."
Always take the percentage, kids. Always take the percentage.
And so we are where we are. But the problem you have is F1 actually was just recently released from this deal, not too long ago. In the last couple of years, EU said, we are no longer monitoring this. You have maintained the conditions we set forth. Congratulations. We're not going to worry about it anymore. But if the commercial side has enough influence to literally take out the FIA president, well, I can be fairly sure that the EU might become very, very interested in that again. And that's something nobody wants. So when I talk about my concerns, that's really it. They do have to be careful, because if not, someone's going to report them, and they're going to be much more limited in how and what they can do than they currently are. And right now, overall, the system's working pretty well because the sport is popular. We have more money coming in. The teams are on a better financial. Nobody wants to upset this apple cart. Just for playing politics.
Except the FIA, the current sitting FIA president, it seems. So the team, he was in open warfare with the team bosses, openly calling out Christian Horner and Toto Wolff. Stefano Domenicali has come out, it seems, very much opposed to the so-called ban on freedom of expression. And he seemed specifically unhappy with the FIA stance on that. And I think he seems to have annoyed the drivers with things like jewelry bans and focusing on what is possibly the wrong thing. So the day-to-day running is now going to be by Nicholas Tombasis, who thankfully...
Head of single seaters?
Yeah. Yep. Say again. Single what now?
Head of single seaters.
Oh, head of single
seaters. FIA.
So ex-Ferrari guy. I don't know anything about him, and I'm kind of hoping that remains the case. So I think the best thing for everyone is if I don't care or know about Nicholas Tombasis.
Yeah, I think, did he work for Renault for a spell, maybe? He's bounced around between teams and the FIA. And again, I'm not going to say I approve of all of what Suleyman's done, but I suspect all of this, and really what I want to point to is, do you remember when Formula One said, we're going to have 6 sprint races? You love sprint races, right, Spanners?
I do. I
love sprint races, don't you? They're your favorite thing, aren't they?
The more races, the better.
And Suleyman said, well, wait a minute. We're the FIA. We're going to decide whether or not that happens. I feel like the F1 and Liberty might have been treating him and the FIA as very much a rubber stamp for whatever they wanted to do. And although, again, I don't approve of everything, I like the idea that that is not necessarily the case.
Spanners, I wholeheartedly agree with you.
Yes.
That I don't want to be hearing stories about the FIA or Nicholas Tombasis now.
Yep.
I want to be hearing stories about what's happening on track and what's happening inside Formula One between the teams. Not so much with the FIA, the commercial rights holders, whatever. I don't care. I care about racing. And I think that's the same for 99% of the people watching this sport.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be hearing about the absolute farces that were, for example, Japan last year when they announcing the points and no one knows what it is, and
missiles going off in the background,
all this, right? I don't want any of that. Okay, I want good racing, and hopefully, I agree. Hopefully, we won't be hearing too much from the FIA now.
Awesome. Right. So let's just look forward now to the live launches that I will be continuing to ignore and just catching up with later. So we have had so far Red Bull, Williams, Alfa Romeo, Alfa Tauri with the drawing of, and you didn't seem like a big fan of the Alfa Tauri drawing. What was your specific beef with the rendering?
Oh, it just looks so much lower quality compared to last year.
But that might be on purpose. They might be sort of keeping it under
maybe,
their
but
sleeve.
Formula One did a side by side, and it looked awful.
Oh, okay. Well, tomorrow, which is Monday, we're going to have the McLaren launches and the Aston Martin launches. I don't know if there's anything to look out for there. Perhaps we'll get another awkward Lawrence Stroll just staring at the camera, telling us things for 20 minutes. Ferrari ruining Valentine's Day by doing their launch on the 14th.
No, they're improving.
Breaking hearts.
Breaking hearts. There you go.
Hey.
And then Mercedes and Alpine. And I'll maintain what I've been saying for all of the off season is that you could completely ignore all these launches and tune in for the testing or even FP1 in race 1, and you won't fundamentally miss anything.
I'll tell you what though, it is unusual. I don't remember the last time this happened. It is unusual to see all the launches done so early, like a week before testing starts. A lot of the times you get teams launching their cars on the first day of testing. So that's unusual. There's a level of readiness and preparedness there that I haven't seen for a while.
Well, PR readiness, that's all.
Well, that's very true.
Ask yourself, where is testing this year?
Bahrain.
Yeah.
It's not in Barcelona. Shipping is a thing. Logistics is a thing. And so we're seeing these teams ready sooner because they don't really have a choice.
Yeah, but we all know they're show cars anyway. It's not like they're going to stick the actual 23 chassis in front of an audience.
We've seen 3 cars on track. I bet you will see all the cars run a filming day, which is mostly what they use for shakedowns now. Because they have a...
Yeah, so shakedown is, will this car fall apart? So let's put mostly all the bits in it and just see that it at least runs on track. So that's not really for the designers. That's not for lap times. That is more for the mechanics that are going, right, does this physically get around a track? Does it shake the driver to, does it shake his bones?
Yeah, well, and they have to use special tires that are limited to 100 kilometers for a filming day. And 15, I think, if it's an event, like when they ran the Red Bull in New York last year. So you will see most of the teams try and do this before they actually go to testing to look for system problems that they can troubleshoot between now and when actual testing starts, when the cars will be under a lot more stress.
And for all the aero philosophy and the strakes and are they high rake, are they low rake, there are going to be at least 30 people across the paddock that are just wondering if the clips for the wiring looms are going to stand up to the G-force around the test track. So I think there is enough going on for us to get excited. If you're a fan of a particular team, then I accept that it is very exciting to see, well, what livery is your team going to be wearing? It's like a kit launch in football, isn't it? And what merchandise can you line up and pay 30% over the odds for this season? And I think
30%.
Well, I think
that's really good.
Well, more than last season is what I was thinking. I don't buy any team kit. I've never bought a piece of Formula One team kit because the price is horrendous.
Where did you get your super trendy Haas cap from?
That was a gift.
That was a gift.
I'm kind of I'm an international podcasting icon. Occasionally, people send me things. I've got a Latifi helmet over there. I've got a Lewis Hamilton mini helmet over there. It's a very lucky position to be in.
Spanners, Lance Stroll merch.
If you want to send me stuff, I'm more than open to being sent stuff. But yeah, no, merchandise. It's definitely aimed at a demographic that I didn't grow up in. Chris, it's the football kit as well. It's the same thing, and you wonder, is the whole point of the livery launches aimed at merchandise to a certain extent?
No, it was very much a PR commercial.
Oh, there you go.
Thing.
There you go.
I mean, that includes, the merch, but I think it's more about keeping the sponsors happy.
I remember when I got married, somebody told me weddings are for the families, marriages are for you and your wife. And I want to say that launches are for the marketing, but testing, that's for the team.
Yeah, there we go. Well, if you want to follow a marketing expert, follow Chris Stevens by following at Chris on Racing on Twitter. And also you can follow Matt at MattPT55 or search for Matt Trumpets on Facebook and Instagram. And you can follow me as well. I'm Richard Reddy on Facebook. You can be my friend there. My DMs are open on Twitter. So at SpannersReady. And you can email me and Matt by using the email address feedback@missedapex.net, wherever we see you next. I would urge you to work hard, to be kind, and have fun. This was Missed Apex Podcast.